Geek Therapy Radio.
How's it going, everybody? Proud Papa Geek here. Listening to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Lots going on. It seems like the tail end of 2020 has just been steamrolling ahead with tech and developments in the geek world. New graphics cards from AMD. NVIDIA had graphics cards launched earlier this year, the 3000 series graphics cards. Perhaps the biggest, off the top of my head, kind of tech announcement this year has been obviously Apple's own silicon, the M1 chip being offered in the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini. There's also been even more negative things to come out of 2020, even more heartache and burdens, and just, man, 2020 can just be done now. You know, the thing in my personal life, obviously, that makes up for it is the birth of my son. But most everything else, just globally and here in the United States and with friends and family, it's just been terrible. But let's not talk about the terrible things here on Geek Therapy Radio, at least not today. I don't make a habit of talking about the terrible things here because I think Geek Therapy Radio is a place where we can come to geek out about what we're passionate about. You know, it's not some place where I crack the mic and just start bumming you out. I do not discount that there are important things to talk about in the world, of course, politics and all that kind of stuff, and suffering, human suffering, but just Geek Therapy Radio, it's kind of, like I said, it's the oasis from that kind of stuff. We don't ignore it, but it's just a place where we can come and celebrate geekhood and geekdom, and that we're all geeks about something. So I wanted to start out the podcast today with confessing something or bringing up a point that kind of caught me off guard, really. It's almost like the Cybertruck. Back when the Cybertruck was announced, was that also earlier this year? I'm losing count, man. When I first saw the Cybertruck, I was thinking, that is a god-awful monstrosity. I even went as far as to say Elon Musk was trolling us. There's no way that thing is real. There's no way that's going to be the final release that we get, you see driving along the road. But it's not a hoax. The Cybertruck is a real thing that's going to be offered, I believe, in 2022 is the timeline now. And what even more surprised me with the Cybertruck is that after about 24 hours, like, I slept on it. I saw the announcement, and then I dreamt about the Cybertruck, and then I woke up, and throughout the morning, like the next morning and afternoon after the announcement, I had gone to bed hating the thing, gone to bed thinking that what a ridiculous thing this is. 24 hours later, I was like, I want one so bad. If it comes out, by the time it comes out, I can afford to get one. I really want a Cybertruck. And the Chevy Bolts that I'm driving right now could possibly be a stopgap between me and a Cybertruck. Now, maybe not 2022 by the time the Cybertruck comes out that I'll get one, but after having the Bolt for a few years and then letting the Cybertruck kind of go through its growing pains, I wouldn't be getting a 2022 Cybertruck, maybe a 24 or 25 Cybertruck. We'll see. Riker will be a few years old by then, but we'll see about the Cybertruck. The only picture I'm painting here is that I went to bed hating the Cybertruck, and then throughout the next day, I wound up really wanting one. It grew on me, and it became the coolest car in the world to me besides the DeLorean. So I'm telling you all that to tell you this. Something similar has happened with me and the Apple M1 chip, specifically the MacBook Air or the MacBook Pro, in that I went to bed not hating it. Obviously, you've heard my piece on the Apple M1. We've talked about the Apple M1. You know that overall, I think for the entire industry, this is it's going to have it's not a ripple effect. It's the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. That's the kind of impact that it has in the computer industry. I think that Apple moving to an ARM processor is going to, not to sound redundant, change the industry. That means we're going to see more ARM-based personal computers out there in the wild, that eventually maybe Windows will be coded more efficiently for ARM, that maybe we'll get boot camp back on the M1, all sorts of ramifications that will come down the pipe over the coming years because Apple boldly, if I may be so blunt, took one of their main computing platforms, personal computers and ultra portables, and were switched to ARM and make their own in-house chip. So obviously Apple, ARM processors had been around for a while. ARM processors in our phone, ARM processors in our tablets, ARM processors in the Internet of Things, ARM processor in your Nintendo Switch. ARM processors are everywhere. So the more I thought about it, my biggest concern upon release was the only benchmark we were seeing was Geekbench. How the Apple M1 and the MacBook Mini, MacBook Air, and MacBook Pro just destroys competition in the Geekbench 5 benchmarks. And I was getting kind of flustered. I even went onto Twitter and said, boy, I can't wait to see a benchmark that isn't Geekbench. And a couple people liked it. I don't have a huge following, but a couple of you liked it and shared the sentiment. Well, obviously now, as of recording, there have been many, many more benchmarks of the Apple M1 powered devices, and they, for the very most part, look good. I couldn't understand why it was just Geekbench. The reason why it was just Geekbench is because I think Geekbench was the most kind of dramatic. That the Geekbench scores were beating out, 16-inch MacBook Pro i9 processors and single-core performance especially, and it was kind of the most dramatic impression of the performance increase. Except Geekbench is a kind of a controversial benchmark. I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details of it, but it's not considered to be the most real-world or tax the processor as thoroughly as something like Cinebench R20 or Cinebench R23 or other benchmarks. But that's why my main piece has always been, don't ever trust one benchmark alone. Don't ever look at one, no matter if it's the M1 or a Core i9 or a Ryzen 5950X, and you see one benchmark that tells you almost nothing. You need to see a lot of benchmarks together to start getting a clear picture of what these processors and what these machines are fully capable of, which is why I was so pissed off. Apple was so vague in their presentation, 3.5 times faster than the next laptop in its class. Like, in its what class? In its form factor and its price? What are you talking about? Apple was so vague, 3 times faster than previous Intel-based Mac. What does that mean? In doing what? 3 times faster doing what? In what sort of parameter is it 3 times faster? So Apple being very vague with the M1 performance, and then only seeing Geekbench scores for like the first 24 hours, 72 hours, whatever, not 72, 24, 48 hours, 36 hours, something like that. Shortly after Apple's announcement of the M1, all we saw was Geekbench. Why? Geekbench leaks. Apple M1 leaks have been confirmed on Geekbench, and it's crazy. Like, why can't we see something else other than Geekbench? People have had the MacBooks for a while, and I know NDAs and non-disclosure agreements, but still all we were seeing was Geekbench for a couple days. And reviewers had this machine. So after the dust has settled, there have been more benchmarks, more kind of real-world use case scenarios. We're getting a clearer picture of what the M1 processor is capable of in MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros and the Mac Mini. And the general consensus is that it slays, that it is actually amazing. Still don't know why Apple was so vague in their arbitrary performance numbers, 3 times faster than whatever, something vague. Why did they do that? But it turns out, despite Apple's vagary, out in the wild, it's benchmarking great, and it's performing great, and people are doing, Adobe Premiere exports, which is emulated through Rosetta Stone. It's x86 emulated ARM architecture through Rosetta 2, and it's doing great. It's not going to beat out any sort of workstation class PC like a 5950X, 16 cores, 32 threads, and a RTX 3080 Ti or anything like that. But as far as ultra portables are concerned, as far as laptops are concerned, as far as competition for the XPS 13, XPS 15, and kind of the Surface Pros and all that stuff, it holds its own even under emulation, exporting 4K videos in Adobe Premiere emulated through Rosetta 2. It's holding its own. That's amazing. And I can't stress that that's under emulation. That's not even running native code. And Adobe will eventually, here in the very near future, release native M1 versions of their software, native M1 versions of Premiere. And if the usage is that good under emulation, just imagine what it will be once the code is native. So that has me thinking. We'll get into more concerns later on after I express this idea. I want an M1 powered MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. That's kind of the corner I've turned here. Now, before you say, I can't say anything like that. Nobody in this kind of tech space, geek space, can say something like, yeah, I want a new MacBook Air or I want a MacBook Pro. You can't make that statement without being labeled, like a turncoat or an Apple fanboy or whatever. That's ridiculous. I'm 37 years old. Anybody else kind of my age or, older than a teenager knows that fanboyism is stupid. Once you reach a certain age, you like what you like and you buy what you're going to buy, and it has nothing to do with fanboyism. Me wanting to buy an Apple M1 powered something does not mean at all that I'm ditching x86 or that it's going to be my daily driver for everything. I've just built my AMD Ryzen 9 3900X system with 32 gigs of RAM and all that business. That's still going to be my workstation. I'm still going to do my major work on that. I'm still going to keep my 2 or 3 year old at this point MSI GS43 VR. It's got the i7 and a GTX 1060 in there, 64 gigs of RAM. I have multiple PCs running x86 and running Windows. The only Apple devices I have right now are a handful of old iPhones and a few iPads. I haven't had a Mac personal computer since 2007, 2009-ish. I just haven't been so compelled. And my argument for wanting to finally pull the trigger and get, I'm probably leaning mostly towards a MacBook Air right now. If I was going to build it out, 16 gigabytes of RAM, possibly a 512 gigabyte hard drive. That's going to get kind of expensive. We'll see what I wind up on if and when I even get it. I want it right now, and I just got to figure out how to pay for it, when it's okay to pay for it, and kind of work on the finances a little bit to see whether it's okay or not. Just had the baby, obviously. So we'll see about that, but I want it, and I'll let you know if I do get it. But I'm going to tell you why I want it. It's not to, like I said, it's not to abandon x86, and it's not even to abandon Windows. It's a paradigm shift in the industry, and I kind of want to have it because almost strictly, and I know you can relate to this, I'm a geek. And it's very rare that kind of something cutting edge comes along that I want to be on the ground floor of, just so I can see the daily developments. The daily third-party software developers adding compatibility with ARM-based processors running on the Apple M1, because I know that means you're a step away from that exact same software running on ARM processors like my Raspberry Pi, theoretically. That the code is very similar since it's an ARM-based architecture now. It's CISC instead of RISC, or it's RISC instead of CISC, reduced instruction set, ARM architecture, that it's very closely it's a matter of time before it can theoretically run on a Raspberry Pi or my Snapdragon-based Samsung Galaxy Note 9. So I want the M1 so that I can kind of just geek out each day at the developments of ARM-based processing in the mainstream of personal computers. I just find it really, really fascinating. And this is the only thing that's come along in a long time from Apple that makes me think, that really got me excited. Okay, wow, this is really something cool here. You know, we had Throttlegate, and you have all sorts of issues that Apple is not immune from criticism. But this is the first thing to come along that makes me really, okay, Apple, this is really cool what you're doing here, or at the very least very fascinating. And I like being fascinated, so I want this fascinating thing so I can stay abreast of it and let my listeners know the developments, kind of my experience with the Apple M1. That's what I would love to do. Financially, we'll figure it out. I should plug Patreon. That's a perfect segue to plug the Patreon, because I almost never do in the podcast, and I need to do that. You can find Geek Therapy Radio podcast on Patreon. It's linked in the podcast description. You can donate there. To let you know what I'm making now on Patreon, because I like to be transparent about it. I think I'm like $20, I think, hits my bank account every month, and I fully appreciate that, because it is diapers and it is wipes, and I fully appreciate that anybody give me anything on Patreon. That's crazy. It's crazy to think about people supporting me on there, so I fully appreciate that. So one of the things I say about Patreon is that 5% right off the top of whatever I earn goes to help mental health research. But that's not true, because the minimum I donate to mental health research is $25 a month. So I'm bringing in $20 on Patreon, but I'm donating $25 to mental health research. So basically, everything I get through Patreon is going straight to mental health research. The idea is that $25 is the minimum. Eventually, they'll get more patrons, and the 5% eventually will be the $25, and then we'll ramp it up from there. And you know what? I ain't too proud to say that if one of my listeners is well-heeled and wants to make a donation to Geek Therapy Radio of a MacBook, that is quite extravagant. I can't ask you to do that, obviously, but if I got some sort of email, shoot, man, I'd probably cry a little bit. But who knows? I'll figure out a way to make it work, and I will get a MacBook eventually. So there are still some concerns with the M1 powered MacBook Pros, or any MacBook Mini, MacBook Air, whatever. And one of the concerns is, for example, as follows. Last night, if anyone follows me on Twitter, you saw me tweet this. I went to Avid's website. Avid makes Pro Tools and other software for filmmakers and audio production. I have Pro Tools. I was certified in Pro Tools. I don't use Pro Tools every day. I prefer Cakewalk Sonar, but I know my way around Pro Tools. And one of the things that I would need to use, that I would prefer to use, let me say that I would prefer to use on Mac, that is universal between Mac and Windows, is Pro Tools. Pro Tools runs fine, obviously, on Intel-powered Macs. But I went to check Avid's website, and Avid does not have a native version of Pro Tools running on the M1 yet. Doesn't have Pro Tools First, doesn't have professional version of Pro Tools, the paid version of Pro Tools, and it just says to be determined or no announcement yet, which means as of right now, Pro Tools does not run on Apple M1 powered Macs, nor is there any sort of date, anything floating around the wind at Avid when they will recompile Pro Tools code for ARM-based processors. And that's one of those things. That's going to be one of those growing pains, and that's one reason why I do want an Apple M1, is because I want to stay current with that. Again, it all circles back around to, if Pro Tools is recompiled to run on ARM-based processors, that means theoretically you could have Pro Tools on your smartphone or Pro Tools on your Raspberry Pi. Reaper for Raspberry Pi is another DAW, a digital audio workstation. All DAWs kind of work the same, whether it's Reaper or Pro Tools or Cakewalk Sonar or oh gosh, why am I blanking out on Apple's own? Sorry, Logic Pro. I don't know why I blanked out on that. They're all similar. And Reaper works amazingly on a Raspberry Pi. How cool would it be to have full-blown Pro Tools running on a Raspberry Pi? If that happened, then I would say most of what I do on a computer, I could do on a Raspberry Pi. A Raspberry Pi sucking up like 5 watts or 9 watts rather than my desktop PC, the Ryzen 9 PC that's sucking 500 to 600 watts out of the wall at full tilt. Like, why I don't need to turn all that on? Why can't I just put on a 5-watt Raspberry Pi 4 and do all the same amount of work? That's why the M1 is so impressive and so cool. Is this idea that ARM computers, ultra efficient ARM processors, will be running desktop applications and full-on professional grade applications like Pro Tools, like Final Cut. Final Cut is already native to the Apple M1. It's just an amazing future, and I would like to be a part of that on the ground floor, just as a geek, being fascinated by it all. But again, that's still the concern. Right now, there are major third-party applications like Pro Tools that the film industry uses, that professional recording studios use, that just do not work with Apple M1, and there is no plan in the works, at least from Avid, no date by the time they'll have, they'll work on it. But that being said, sources tell me, by tell me I mean I've read, that third-party development for the M1 is very robust and actually very promising. Like we're gonna wait for third-party software like Pro Tools to be coded for the ARM processor, but we won't actually be waiting. It's not going to be years and years. It's not going to be 5 years before Pro Tools works on ARM. To be frank, and I'm going to keep using Pro Tools for an example here because it's what I know the most about. Depending on how old you are and how invested you've been in music production, you'll know that back even as late as the early 2000s, when it was like 2000, mid 2000s, so 2005, 2004, Pro Tools used to be Mac only. There was no Pro Tools for Windows-based PCs. Mac didn't own Pro Tools financially, but Pro Tools only worked on Mac. That's one of the major reasons why when you walked into any major recording studio, the only PCs you see in there would be Macs, like the Mac G4, Mac G5, and older Macintoshes, even back to running on PowerPC. Pro Tools only worked with Mac. So there's no doubt in my mind that Pro Tools will stay loyal to Mac. There's no doubt in my mind that we will see Avid recompile Pro Tools for the Mac M1 much, much sooner than later. But as it stands right now, as a recording, it doesn't work on the Mac M1. Another concern one reason I want a Mac M1 is that I can be on the bleeding edge of this, is now the fire is lit under Microsoft's butt to compile a really polished, good working version of Windows 10 running on ARM. Like I've mentioned in podcasts before, there are Windows on ARM devices, the Samsung Galaxy Book S, for instance, and it's basically emulated. x86 emulated for ARM of the Galaxy Book S, for instance, but we don't have a good working version of Windows completely recompiled for ARM yet. And if there's any incentive to do so, Apple M1 processor, Mac moving to their own in-house silicon is the biggest fire under the butt of Microsoft. It used to be, oh yeah, Windows on 10 on ARM, let's just emulate it and run it on a Snapdragon, put it on the Samsung Galaxy Book S. It'll be a fun experiment. And it turns out it's not great. Now, because you don't have Boot Camp anymore as it stands right now, Microsoft has all the incentive in the world to recompile a working version of Windows, an awesome version. Once Windows goes to ARM natively, like natively on ARM, that's the game changer. Really. So what Apple's done with moving to the ARM-based M1 processor is they've really set the ball rolling in the industry that more manufacturers are going to start building at least personal computers on ARM. What really is going to be the turning point, like the no going back point, is when Microsoft develops Windows to run natively on ARM. That's going to be just the final knockout punch. Really, think about it. By the time Windows is running natively on ARM, given that over the past 5 to 10 years, I know all the talk is of quantum computing, and we are still a ways out before quantum computing is available to the layperson, to the consumer. You're not going to be walking around with a quantum computing laptop anytime soon. Quantum computing is going to be done in the cloud. You're going to have your cell phone or a tablet, and you're going to load lines of code, and you're going to load calculations and stuff like that, and they're going to be supercomputers that are quantum computers, and they're going to run those calculations and compile that software and run that code off-site. So the future of quantum computing is going to be basically cloud-based in these supercomputers that scientists have access to, and then eventually consumers have access to, developers and such. But the big move in the next 5 to 10 years is ARM. And once Microsoft compiles Windows to run on ARM natively, that's the final blow for x86 and the kind of day-to-day consumer base. And even then, like when will be the day when x86 is just done? Is x86 going to be off the consumer radar? There's still going to be x86, I think, in some application somewhere. They're going to still be running x86. But the writing's on the wall. The writing is on the wall for x86 in the consumer space, I think. That's my prediction. We'll check back on this 5 to 10 years. Are you listening to this on a device? You're already listening to this. The lion's share of you are already listening to this podcast on an ARM-based processor. You're listening on your iPhone, you're listening on your tablet, you're listening on your Samsung phone, your Nokia, your whatever. It's an ARM-based processor. We already interact with ARM-based processors every day. But when will you whip out your laptop or go sit down at your big workstation desktop PC and it not be an x86 inside? There might be, as I'm thinking about it, if I may truly kind of geek out for a moment, I don't know. I don't know how much truth there is. I'm just spitballing here. I love to do this on Geek Therapy. I'm just spitballing a geek kind of concept. What if we have hybrid processors? What if during the transition we have ARM-based processors, but with a few cores or a section of the processor of the system on chip running x86 natively? What if Apple had done that? Do you think we'll see hybrid chips like that? Or do you think that what I would lean towards, now that I'm kind of talking myself through it, is that emulating x86 on ARM is just going to get so good that that ARM-based processors are just going to get so fast and so efficient that emulating x86 on ARM is going to be faster than running it on actual x86. That's probably where it's going. But do you think, theoretically, that we might have hybrid SoCs that run ARM and a few cores of x86? Maybe. That sounds catastrophically expensive to manufacture. And who's going to do it? Who are the major chip makers right now that are going to do it? Is Intel? Maybe? The way ARM works is you license the ability to run ARM, essentially is how it works. So maybe Intel will come out with some ARM-based hybrid processors, like a core, the 2025 Core i9, if they're still calling it i series, the 2025 Core i9 whatever with 16 x86 cores, 32 hyper-threaded streams of x86, and then you have 8 or 16 ARM processing cores, and then you have like 8 more little highly efficient ARM cores, all in the same chip. I am not an engineer. I'm not a software developer. I'm not a coder. I can't even begin a programmer. I can't even begin to imagine how you would make that work seamlessly in one system. But I don't think it's impossible. I think if any of you are programmers and coders listening, email me if I'm wrong, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com, or just go to the website, geektherapyradio.com, and tell me no. Tell me. I don't think it's impossible. Do you think it's possible to have a system on chip that's both running ARM alongside x86 cores? Do you think it's possible? I think it's possible. Is it difficult? Probably. That's probably the answer that I would receive, is that, yeah, is it possible? Yes. Is it doable? Theoretically. Is it plausible? Not really. Like I said, I think ARM is just going to get so efficient at emulating x86 that it kind of rules everything I just said moot. But if we do get a processor in 5 to 10 years, if Intel is trying something, I don't know, to stay relevant, if AMD is coming out with some new stuff or whatever, if competition, necessitates it, we'd see a hybrid chip. It would just be fascinating to see. That's all I'm getting at. It would just be neat to see. But yeah, I want a M1 powered MacBook. I was wishing that it would be the 12-inch MacBook out the gate. That seems like the friggin' perfect candidate for fanless M1. The MacBook Air, M1 powered MacBook Air, is already fanless. I made a video that YouTube was doing really well for me. It was kind of not skyrocketing, but it was doing way better than my videos normally do, and then it just plateaued. For some reason, the YouTube algorithm, it's like if you have a small channel, which by the time this releases, I'm probably going to have 4,000 subscribers, by the way, so thank you very much for that. If a small channel like mine releases a video that's doing well, the algorithm, it really seems like it just clamps down on it. Like if you see it, and I posted a picture of it to Twitter, you see it rising. You see the steep growth of the video, and then on a certain minute of a certain day, just like boop, it flatlines. It's like, oh, you're getting 100 views per hour or whatever it is, which for a small channel is pretty good. And then all of a sudden, 4 per day. What? And some could argue that, well, yeah, that's just your subscribers watching the video, and then once the percentage of subscribers, goes off, then yeah, that's the flat line. But except it's not. You can see where the traffic's coming from, and it's coming from browse features. I can see what percentage of views come from subscribers, and it's something like 3%. I mean, it's really, when these huge channels, so like MKBHD and Linus Tech Tips and all of them, subscriber views is always low. Even if you have 10 million subscribers, every single of your 10 million subscribers isn't going to instantly watch the video. And that's very true. Marquez Brownlee he has over 10 million subscribers. Every time he releases a video, does it get 10 million views? No. That just tells you that every subscriber is not watching. In the bulk of even the biggest channels, the bulk of their views still come from unsubscribed viewers. So for a small channel like me, I can, if it was just the subscribers watching, the percentages, it would be like 30 people watching, and then that's it. Done. But the fact that the last video I released on the Mac M1 was doing so well for a day or two, and then just flatline, that means the algorithm, YouTube, clamped on it and said, no, we're not promoting this anymore. Why is that? Is it getting in the way? Is this little small channel video getting in the way of the big ones? The big channels? We can conspiracy theorize all we want to. But in the video, I expressed all my concerns with the M1, and it wasn't that I was it wasn't to persuade somebody to buy it or not to buy it. It was just kind of, here's why it's cool. Here's what it means for the industry. Here's why you should, consider buying it or not consider buying it. If this is important to you, then it might be a factor. If this is not important to you, then it might be a factor. You make your own mind up. I can't tell you what to do here. But if these are important to you, or these aren't important to you, then you can use this video to help make your mind as you watch other videos. But yeah, as it stands right now, I'll start wrapping up the podcast. I want an M1 Mac because at the very baseline, it just appeals to the geek in me. And that's all it is. I mean, mostly what it is. I would try to find a way to make it work into my workflow. And let's say I got a Mac M1 tomorrow. What would I use to record podcasts and such with? Well, I could theoretically go Logic. I could slap the extra $200 Logic software on there and use Logic. But part of me is thinking, why not just use GarageBand? The thing is, I do this jujitsu with my audio that I've used GarageBand on my iPad. I can't do the same audio jujitsu with GarageBand. Maybe there's a way to do it. Maybe I just haven't spent a whole lot of time, but it's not. GarageBand is kind of, to me, it seems like a beginner's audio workstation, if that makes sense. It's made to have very accessible. It's kind of like Acid Music. I'm bringing up something from the past. Way in the past, 2001. Acid Music 1.0 was kind of the first software that really catered to just making music with loops, pre-recorded loops that you just drag around and make a song with loops. That's kind of, Fruity Loops is like that. Fruity Loops is a lot more involved, though. Fruity Loops is a lot more MIDI-based. It's gotten way better. But yeah, GarageBand seems like kind of stripped down. It's kind of stripped down. For instance, I can't find a way to. It's not mouse based, like not on the iPad at least. It's not mouse and keyboard. I felt very restricted. I duck when you listen to the bump music of the podcast and the radio show. You'll hear as the bump music fades out or fades in that it ducks underneath my voice, so that you can always more or less hear clearly what I'm saying, that no matter when I'm talking, the music always actually is pulled down. It compresses automatically down beneath my voice so that my voice is always on top and my voice always pushes everything else down. You hear the same effect when you hear dance music that pumps. Boom, when the kick drum, when the bass drum hits, boom, 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 boom. You hear the bass track, like the bass guitar track and the synths and everything kind of pump down underneath it. It's a very popular style, and that's called ducking. I haven't been able to figure out in GarageBand, at least on iPad, how to duck. And ducking is very important to me. And ducking is accomplished by basically side chaining. So, not to get too overly technical here, but this is Geek Therapy Radio, and I didn't know I was going to go off on this tangent. The way I duck for the podcast is that I take my vocal track, my voiceover track, which is what you're listening to right now. I create a send, and I send the audio like a parallel audio signal to the compressor on the bump music, so that the music isn't what triggers the compressor, it's my voice that triggers the compressor, and that's called ducking. And I haven't figured out a way to do that on GarageBand on the iPad yet. Maybe you can do it on a Mac. That's all something I would have to explore. GarageBand on a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro, that's all something I would have to explore. I know you can definitely do it in Logic. You can do it in Fruity Loops even. It's like a slider. It's really easy. I would just have to figure out how to incorporate the Mac ecosystem into my workflow. I just want to dabble with a Mac. Can I just be honest with you? I just want to dabble with it now that it's M1 and ARM. It's just fascinating to me. So I'll figure out how to get my hands on a Mac, and I will let you know if and when I do. And if you are well-heeled and want to make a donation, Merry Christmas. I don't know. Like, I would feel so guilty about a gift like that. I would be thinking about ways to repay, Like if you were from Houston and you did that, I'd be like, let me come to your house for an hour or two every Saturday, even though I just had a child, and let me clean your house top to bottom. Like I can't just receive this without giving anything in return. If it was a business that donated, that'd be really easy. If a local business said, yeah, Johnny, we'll give you a Mac, I'm like, easy. I can just promote your business for a few months or whatever on the radio show. That's really easy like that. It's the way it works. But anyways, we'll see. I will sign off now. I'll remind you once again, Patreon. I don't do that enough. Patreon. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for listening to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. And you are worthy of your own self-respect. We're all geeks about something, so embrace your inner geek. And let me know, are you getting a Mac? Do you already have a Mac? An M1, I mean, specifically. Do you have an M1 powered Mac? I would love for you to email me or contact me through the website, geektherapyradio.com. Let me know what you think about your Mac M1. Are you enjoying it? I know Colin got one from This Does Not Compute. I know Clint got one from Lazy Game Reviews. I'll talk to them soon about their experience with a Mac. But do you have a Mac M1? Let me know what you think about it. geektherapyradio.com. Above all else, like I said, you're worthy of love. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you so soon. Can't wait.